October 17, 1943. A muddy field 3 kilometers south of Smolensk. The T-34 tank designated Fighting Girlfriend sat smoking in a shell crater, its right tread blown off by German anti-tank fire. Wehrmacht positions held the ridge 200 meters ahead, their guns trained on anything that moved. A single figure crawled from the tank's hatch, a woman in grease-stained overalls, her hair tied back with wire. Maria Okjabskaya dropped to the ground and dragged a toolbox toward the damaged track. Mortar rounds began walking toward her position. She didn't run. This moment would reshape how Red Army commanders viewed female combatants, but more immediately, it would determine whether her unit could hold this ground or retreat in defeat. She had been fighting for 3 months. Our story follows Maria Okjabskaya, a woman whose personal loss became a weapon against the Wehrmacht. When her husband Alexei died on the Eastern Front in 1941, she made a decision that military authorities initially dismissed as grief-driven fantasy. She would sell everything she owned, donate the money to build a tank, and drive it herself into battle. She was 40 years old, a factory telephonist with no military training. The Red Army command reluctantly agreed, expecting her to serve a symbolic role before quietly returning to civilian life. They underestimated what grief could forge into purpose. Maria became not just a trained tank driver but a combat veteran who repaired her vehicle under fire and drove it into Wehrmacht lines with methodical fury. This is the story of how love transformed into something harder than armor plate. Maria Vasilyevna Okjabskaya was born in 1905 in Crimea, the daughter of a laborer. Little is recorded about her childhood, but what shaped her most clearly was her marriage to Alexei Fyodorovich Okjabsky, a Red Army officer she met in the 1920s. They had no children. When war came in June 1941, Alexei was sent west with his regiment. Maria worked as a telephonist in Tomsk, Siberia, far from the front. For months she received letters. Then in summer 1941, the letters stopped. The official notification arrived weeks later. Alexei had been killed near Kiev in August, during the catastrophic encirclements that cost the Red Army over 600,000 men. Something crystallized in Maria after that. She later wrote to officials that she could not bear to sit behind a telephone switchboard while fascists occupied the land where Alexei had fallen. Accounts differ on exactly when the idea came to her, but by early 1943, she had formulated a plan so audacious that it bypassed every conventional path a Soviet woman might take to contribute to the war effort. She would buy a tank. Maria sold her possessions, liquidated every asset she had, and sent a letter to the State Defense Committee with a specific proposal. She would donate funds to build a tank named Fighting Girlfriend, in memory of her husband, and she would serve as its driver. She added that she had some technical knowledge from working near machinery. It was a partial truth. She had worked as a telephonist, not a mechanic. Historians are not sure whether Stalin himself read it, but the donation was accepted. The stipulation about serving as driver presented a problem. Soviet forces did employ women in combat roles more extensively than other armies, as pilots, snipers, anti-aircraft gunners, but female tank crews were virtually non-existent. The machinery was brutal, the physical demands extreme, and tank casualties were among the highest in armored warfare. Officials considered letting her attend a ceremony, accept some recognition, and return home. Maria made it clear this was not acceptable. She wanted to fight. The command relented, perhaps calculating that training her was easier than arguing further. Maria was sent to the Omsk tank school in spring 1943. She was 40 years old in a cohort of men half her age. She did, and with marks high enough to be assigned to active duty. In September 1943, she was posted to the 26th Guards Tank Brigade, part of the 2nd Guards Tank Corps, operating near Smolensk on the Western Front. Her tank bore the name she had chosen, Boyevaya Podruga, Fighting Girlfriend. The crew was skeptical. Their skepticism didn't last long. Maria's first combat engagement came in early October 1943, during the offensive to retake Smolensk. The Wehrmacht had fortified the region heavily. German positions bristled with anti-tank guns, dug-in infantry and minefields. Soviet doctrine called for aggressive armored thrusts supported by infantry, but the terrain was broken and muddy, limiting maneuverability. Tank after tank bogged down or was hit. Fighting Girlfriend advanced with its unit into a forested sector held by German infantry. When the vehicle ahead of her was disabled by a mine, Maria maneuvered around it and drove directly toward the German position, her gunner firing on exposed machine gun nests. The attack succeeded. The position was overrun. Maria's tank returned with minor damage. What set her apart wasn't recklessness. It was something colder. She drove as if the tank were an extension of the grief that had brought her there. Off the battlefield, she was cordial but distant, focused entirely on maintaining the vehicle. She spent hours checking every component, adjusting tension on the tracks, cleaning the gun breech, monitoring the engine. The tank had become the physical embodiment of everything she could not do for Alexei. She would not let it fail. That precision saved her life more than once. On October 17th, during the engagement south of Smolensk, fighting girlfriend took a direct hit from a German Pak-40 anti-tank gun. The shell struck the right side, severing the track and damaging the drive wheel. The tank lurched to a halt. Protocol dictated retreat under covering fire, abandoning the vehicle if necessary. Maria refused. She told her crew to provide suppressing fire while she exited to assess the damage. She crawled under the hull, identified the problem, a broken link and bent wheel housing, and began repairs. Shrapnel peppered the ground around her. Witnesses reported she worked methodically, as if alone in a repair depot rather than under enemy fire. It took 20 minutes. When she finished, the tank could move again, limping back to Soviet lines on a jury-rigged track. Her hands were black with engine oil and dried blood from small cuts. She would carry that mixture on her skin in every battle afterward. Her commanders wrote commendations. Her story began circulating among Soviet units, not as propaganda but as a reality that seemed to defy the war's usual calculus of endurance. Here was a woman past her youth, untrained 6 months prior, conducting herself as if every engagement were a personal settling of accounts. She only wanted to keep fighting. The winter campaign of 1943-44 brought brutal conditions. Maria adapted, learning cold weather maintenance techniques, sleeping beside the tank to monitor it through the night. Her crew rotated out. New men arrived and learned quickly that their driver was not symbolic. She knew the machine better than most of them, and she expected them to match her standard. By December, fighting girlfriend had participated in multiple engagements across the Vitebsk-Orsha line. The Wehrmacht was retreating slowly, contesting every kilometer with dug-in defenses and counterattacks. Soviet losses were heavy. Maria's tank absorbed damage repeatedly. Shell impacts that dented armor, fragments that scarred the turret, one near miss that blew off external fuel drums. After each hit, she repaired it. Engine trouble, track damage, gun malfunction. She addressed each personally, often working alone when mechanics were unavailable. That independence would define her final weeks. On January 15, 1944, near the town of Krinky, fighting girlfriend was advancing with a mixed tank infantry assault when it hit a mine. The explosion tore through the belly armor, killing the radio operator instantly and severely wounding the gunner. Maria, in the driver's position, was thrown against the controls but remained conscious. The tank was immobilized, sitting exposed in the middle of the advance route. German artillery had the range. She ordered the surviving crew out, then exited herself to evaluate whether the vehicle could be saved. The hull was compromised, but the engine still functioned. She crawled underneath with a welding torch, attempting an emergency patch. A second shell landed 10 meters away. Shrapnel tore into her legs and abdomen. She was dragged from beneath the tank by infantry who had seen her working. Medics stabilized her, but the wounds were severe. Deep penetration injuries, fragments embedded in muscle and bone. She was evacuated to a field hospital, then moved to a rear facility in Moscow. Doctors operated multiple times, removing shrapnel, treating infections. She remained conscious through much of it, asking repeatedly when she could return to duty. She never did. Maria Oktyabrskaya died on March 15, 1944, from complications related to her injuries. She was 2 months past her 38th birthday. Accounts differ slightly on her exact birth year, with some sources listing 1905 and others 1902. She had served in active combat for less than 5 months. During that time, she participated in numerous engagements, destroyed or disabled several German positions, and became the first female tanker in Soviet service to die from wounds sustained in battle. Posthumously, she was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. Her story was used in wartime propaganda to demonstrate Soviet resolve and gender equality, though the details were often sanitized or simplified. What those accounts often missed was the specificity of her motivation. Maria fought because grief had nowhere else to go. Every kilometer forward, every shell fired, every repair under enemy fire was a continuation of the marriage that had ended in a field near Kiev. She told fellow soldiers, in one of the few recorded personal statements, that she wanted Germans to know her husband's name through her actions. Whether any German soldier ever learned it is unknown. What is known is that Maria turned sorrow into something operationally effective, and that effectiveness cost her everything she had left. Her legacy is complicated. Soviet authorities celebrated her as a symbol of female capability and wartime sacrifice, but they also used her story selectively, emphasizing patriotic duty over personal vendetta. After the war, fighting girlfriend was repaired and reportedly used in training exercises before being decommissioned. What remains undisputed is that she donated her savings, trained as a tank driver at 40, served in frontline combat, repaired her vehicle under fire multiple times, and died from wounds sustained while attempting to save it. For decades after the war, her name faded from public memory outside specialist histories. The Soviet Union produced thousands of combat narratives, and individual stories often blurred into collective mythology. In recent years, renewed interest in overlooked wartime figures has brought Maria's story back into discussion, though often framed within modern debates about gender and military service rather than the specific historical context of the Eastern Front. But those remembrances rarely capture what made her actions distinct. Maria Oktyabrskyia was not a revolutionary challenging gender norms for ideological reasons. She was a widow who found that the machinery of war offered a language for grief that words could not. The tank became the only conversation she could still have with her husband. Armed engagement was another sentence in that dialogue, spoken in fire and steel. The fact that she was a woman driving a T-34 was incidental to her. It mattered enormously to history, but not to her. She would have fought in whatever form the military allowed, because fighting was the only mourning that made sense. Millions of Soviet soldiers died in combat, were executed, starved in encirclements, or vanished into German captivity. Millions more lived with wounds, physical and psychological, carrying the war inside them for the rest of their lives. Maria's story is one thread in that vast and terrible tapestry, notable not because it was unique but because it was documented. How many others made similar bargains with grief, turned loss into purpose, and died before their stories could be recorded? In the end, Maria got what she wanted. She fought. She drove her tank into German positions, repaired it under fire, and pushed forward until her body gave out. Whether that brought her peace, whether it honored Alexei's memory in the way she intended, no one can say. She left no diary, no extensive letters, only the tank's combat record and the testimony of those who served alongside her. What is certain is that she refused to let her grief remain passive. She made it operational, and in doing so she became a reminder that the war was fought not just by armies and nations, but by individuals carrying losses too specific for history to fully comprehend. Maria Oktyabrskyya's war ended in a hospital bed in Moscow, but the conversation she started, the one about what love becomes when the person it was meant for is gone, has no conclusion. She was buried with military honors. Her medals were sent to family members. Fighting girlfriend was repaired and reassigned. And somewhere in the archival records of the 26th Guards Tank Brigade, her name remains listed among the casualties. Tank driver. Killed in action, March 1944. The details are correct, but they tell only the smallest part of what she did, and nothing at all about why.